A few years ago, during a wedding reception, I was asked why I was not eating animal products. I said that I was motivated by ethical reasons, and the response I got was that animals will be killed regardless. In fact, the particular animals in front of us were already dead, so why not just eat them? Now, some people might find this argument a bit naive, but it gets to a serious problem for the utilitarian vegans. The problem runs as follows. For the utilitarian, whether or not you act morally in abstaining from animal products is entirely dependent on the consequences. However, the consequences can be such that whether or not you abstain from animal products, the same number of animals may be slaughtered regardless. For example, maybe you, as one individual, abstain from animal products, but because the majority of people create a high demand for animal products, they could ensure that the same high number of animals will be slaughtered. After all, it could be the case that one person's boycott makes no difference in the slaughterhouse and factory farm. For veganism to be a moral obligation under utilitarianism, adopting veganism needs to be optimific, that is, lead to the best consequences. But it is only optimific, as far as the abuse and death of non-human animals goes, if enough individuals become vegan and create a change in the market. Peter Singer helps to explain this issue with the following statement. Quote, "There must be some point at which the number of vegetarians makes a difference to the size of the poultry industry. There must be a series of thresholds hidden by the market system of distribution which determine how many factory farms will be in existence. In this case, one more person becoming a vegetarian will make no difference at all unless that individual, added to the others who are already vegetarians, reduces demand below the threshold level at which a new factory farm would have started up, or an existing one would have remained in production if industry is declining." End quote. This leads us to Singer's paradox, as Tom Regan calls it in The Case for Animal Rights. Regan sums up the paradox by stating that, quote, "The point to be stressed is the paradoxical nature of this aspect of Singer's utilitarian basis of the obligation to be vegetarian. What it comes to is that in being a vegetarian, I am doing what I ought to do only if it happens to be true enough other people happen also to be vegetarians, so that when the effects of their boycotting meat are joined with the effects of my boycott, it happens to be the case that some number of chickens that would have been raised in a factory farm are spared that fate. If, on the other hand, the effects of our collective boycott happen not to make any difference in the number of chickens raised intensively, then, in being vegetarians, we are not doing what we ought to do. Not because of any failing on our part, assume we work very hard to persuade others but fail to do so, but because of the effects of the decisions of others, i.e. non-vegetarians, whose demand for meat more than offsets the effect of our boycott. But to make the rightness of what vegetarians do contingent upon the decisions of those very persons who are doing what vegetarians deplore, and Singer's view does imply this, is paradoxical at best. All the more so when we pause to observe that, on this view, all that non-vegetarians need do in order to ensure that they personally escape the obligation to be vegetarian, as this is determined by the vegetarian's impact on factory farming, is to continue doing precisely what it is that they are presently doing, namely eating meat. For there is, on this view, no obligation to abstain from eating meat if too few people do abstain, so that those who do eat meat do nothing wrong. And if, perchance, the ranks of vegetarians were to swell to such an extent that their collective impact on factory farming could, other things being equal, close this or that intensive rearing operation, the non-vegetarians, given Singer's position, could still take steps to escape the obligatoriness of vegetarianism, as this is assessed by the impact of vegetarians on factory farming. All that non-vegetarians would need to do is eat more meat, thereby negating the collective effect of the vegetarians, and so, on Singer's view, thereby negating the meat eater's obligation to be vegetarian. End quote. Of course, one could bring all the empirical evidence one wants to argue that a vegan diet by all, or most, would be optimific, that animal-consuming diets cause more suffering overall. But, according to utilitarianism, the duty one has to be a vegan is, at least, in part contingent on others being vegan. For the utilitarian, we should be ethical vegans if there are enough people who already are or are willing to go vegan. But also for the utilitarian, no one has to be an ethical vegan if not enough people are already or are not willing to go vegan. From this, we begin to see that utilitarianism can fail to have fundamental objections to prevailing prejudices. Racist, sexist, and speciesist practices can all be obligatory under this theory. After all, it's not inconceivable that such practices could be optimific and therefore morally right for the utilitarian. The point is made succinctly by Dan Brock with the following, quote, "A person's desires or preferences are the product of biological needs and the socialization process by which he or she is inducted into society, state, and various social groups. They are importantly determined by, and will tend to reinforce, the existing social arrangements, power, and authority relations, and expectations in one's environment. Consequently, utilitarianism formulated so as to require maximal satisfaction of preferences as they exist, in turn serves to reinforce the existing social structure. It will have a significant conservative bias. For example, a racist, sexist society may foster racist or sexist preferences in its members, and preference utilitarianism seems committed to seeking the satisfaction of these preferences." End quote. Possibly one of the few responses for the utilitarian here is that an individual abstaining from animal products, even if it fails to reduce the number of non-human animals slaughtered, leads to optimific results because of the health benefits of a vegan diet. However, 3 objections to the utilitarian will follow. First, it's possible that the pleasure or preference satisfaction one gets from eating animal products could outweigh, in terms of aggregate utility, the unhealthy consequences of eating animal products, or the frustration one may get from not being able to eat them. Second, if the diet turned out to be on par with, or less healthy than, an omnivore diet, then the utilitarian has no principled way to make a vegan diet obligatory for the individual under the considered paradox. Third, under the conditions of the paradox, but granting the health benefits of a vegan diet, grounding one's obligation to not use and abuse non-human animals in the benefits it brings to oneself is an incredibly flimsy account of the immorality of a non-vegan diet. On this last point specifically, and on the problem in general, Christine Korsgaard elucidates the issue further. Quote, "Even if these arguments show that factory farming is a terrible thing all around and should be abolished, both for the sake of animals and people, you might wonder whether they show that you should become a vegetarian or a vegan. After all, unless a lot of other people do likewise, your refusal to buy the products of factory farms is not going to put them out of business. In fact, maybe you could do more good to the animals themselves, leaving aside the effects on climate and biodiversity, by continuing to eat meat, but pressuring, say, fast food chains to insist that the animals from whom they get their products be treated more humanely." The question is not about just numbers and consequences. It is about you and a particular animal, an individual creature with a life of her own, a creature for whom things can be good or bad. It is about how you are related to that particular creature when you eat her, or use products that have been extracted from her in ways that are incompatible with her good. You are treating her as a mere means to your own ends, and that is wrong." End quote.